Millionaire CEO catches single father janitor teaching Mandarin to his daughter and makes decision. Just before we start, this community spans every continent. Drop your city's name if you feel comfortable sharing. If you've ever felt invisible, you know exactly how Marcus Hale started every single morning. He would park his 2009 Honda Civic, the one with the cracked rear bumper held together by a strip of silver duct tape, in the farthest corner of the PharmaCorp employee lot, the space reserved unofficially for people like him, maintenance staff, custodial crew, the ones who arrived before the executives and left long after the last secretary had clicked off her desk lamp and called it a night. Marcus never complained about the distance. He used those extra steps to breathe, to gather himself, to become, for the next 8 hours, invisible. PharmaCorp occupied a gleaming 22-story tower in downtown Chicago, all polished steel and floor-to-ceiling glass, the kind of building that announced money before you even walked through the front doors. The lobby alone was bigger than the apartment Marcus shared with his 6-year-old daughter, Lily. Marble floors, brass elevator doors, a reception desk staffed by 2 young women who always smiled at the executives and somehow managed to look straight through Marcus every single morning, even though he was the one who kept those marble floors spotless enough to mirror the sky. He had worked at PharmaCorp for 3 years, 2 months, and 11 days. He knew this not because he was counting down to something better, but because Lily had been 3 years, 2 months, and 11 days old when he started, the morning after his sister Rosa had agreed to watch her while he worked. He tied every milestone of this job to his daughter. It was the only way to make the work feel like something more than survival. Marcus was a quiet man. Not shy, not broken, just quiet in the way that people become when they've learned that the world rewards noise with attention, but punishes the wrong kind of noise with consequences. He stood 5'11", lean in the way that comes from never quite having enough, with dark eyes that noticed everything and said little. His co-workers liked him well enough. Rodriguez from the second floor would bring tamales on Fridays. Old Pete from the loading dock always saved him good news when deliveries were light. But nobody really knew Marcus Hale. They knew the janitor, the man in the gray uniform who moved through the hallways like a shadow that cleaned up after the light. What nobody at PharmaCorp knew, what nobody in Marcus's current life knew, not even Rosa, was that he had once sat in a lecture hall at Harvard University and understood every single word the professor said in 3 different languages: English, Mandarin, Portuguese. He had been 20 years old, sharp and hungry and full of something that felt dangerously close to destiny. A scholarship kid from the south side of Chicago who had earned his place not through connections or legacy money, but through a mind that simply would not stop working. That was before his mother got sick, before the bills, before the impossible choices that no 20-year-old should ever have to make. He dropped out at the beginning of his junior year, came home, worked, watched his mother decline anyway, slowly and cruelly over 18 months that aged him a decade. She passed on a Tuesday in November, leaving Marcus with grief, debt, and a younger sister who needed him to hold it together. He held it together. That was what Marcus Hale did. Then came the brief, beautiful, catastrophic chapter of Angela, Lily's mother, who burned bright and fast and left when Lily was 14 months old. Not because she was cruel, because she was 24 and terrified and honest enough to say she wasn't ready for the weight of what their life had become. Marcus didn't hate her for it. He understood, in that quiet way of his, that some people are not built for staying. He just hadn't known until that moment that he was built for nothing else. So here he was, 33 years old, pushing a mop through the 18th floor of PharmaCorp on a Thursday evening in early March, while Lily sat in the empty executive conference room 3 doors down doing her homework. It was a routine they had fallen into out of necessity 6 months ago, when Rosa had broken her ankle and could no longer babysit after school. Marcus couldn't afford aftercare. He'd asked his supervisor, a heavy-set man named Dale, who smelled perpetually of cigarettes and indifference, and Dale had shrugged and said, "Just keep her out of the way." It wasn't permission. Exactly. But it wasn't a no. The conference room Marcus used was the smaller one, Conference Room B, on the northeast corner of the 18th floor, away from the main executive suite. It had a long mahogany table that seated 12, leather chairs that probably cost more each than a month of Marcus's rent. and a wall of windows that looked out over the Chicago River as it turned gold in the late afternoon light. Lily loved those windows. She would press her small hands against the glass and narrate the city to herself in a soft, dreamy voice while Marcus worked the hallway outside. Today, though, Lily wasn't narrating. Today she was studying. Marcus had started teaching her Mandarin 4 months ago, almost by accident. He'd been reading to her one night. She loved books, devoured them with an intensity that sometimes startled him. And she'd pointed at a character on a library book's spine, a Chinese title on a neighboring shelf, and asked what it meant. He'd told her. She'd asked for more. By the third night, she was repeating tones back to him with an accuracy that made him sit up straighter. By the second week, she was asking him questions he hadn't expected a 6-year-old to ask. By the first month, she was dreaming in fragments of Mandarin and waking up to tell him about it. Her brown eyes wide and shining. So he taught her. Every evening in that conference room, after her homework was finished and before the floor needed his attention, he would sit beside her and open the world in a language most people spent years failing to master. She learned it the way children learn everything they love, not by studying it, but by living inside it. On this particular Thursday, Marcus was in the hallway when he heard her voice clearly through the half-open conference room door. "Baba," she said, using the Mandarin word for father, though she knew perfectly well he could hear her. "Wo xiang chuankan, I want to eat dinner. I want to—" He smiled without turning around. "Kwai wan chengle," he said quietly. Almost done. What neither of them noticed was that the elevator doors at the end of the hallway had just slid open, and the woman who stepped out was not supposed to be on the 18th floor at 6:47 on a Thursday evening. She was supposed to be in a car heading to a dinner in River North, seated across from a venture capital firm that had been courting PharmaCorp for 8 months. But Victoria Lane had forgotten her laptop, and Victoria Lane never forgot anything, which was exactly why forgetting her laptop had rattled her enough to turn the car around and come back. She stepped off the elevator in a white blazer and wide-leg ivory trousers, her blonde hair pulled back in that precise, effortless way that took her stylist 40 minutes to achieve. She was 29 years old, CEO of a pharmaceutical company valued at $2.3 billion, and she walked through every room in the world as though she had personally designed it. She was holding her phone to her ear, murmuring something clipped and efficient when the sound stopped her. A child's voice, soft and clear and speaking Mandarin. Victoria lowered her phone. She stood very still in the hallway outside conference room B, listening. The child was reciting vocabulary. Animals. She realized after a moment. Sheyu, shark, laohu, tiger, kongkwe, peacock. The tones were extraordinary. The accent was not the flattened, approximated Mandarin of a beginner's app. It was real, careful, and real. And then the man's voice answered, low and patient, correcting a single tone with a gentleness that made Victoria's breath catch in an unexpected way. She had been to Beijing twice for business. She spoke passable Mandarin herself, enough to negotiate, enough to impress. What she was hearing from the other side of that door was better than passable, significantly better. She pushed the door open slowly. The janitor. She recognized his uniform. The gray PharmaCorp maintenance logo on the chest, was seated at the far end of the mahogany table beside a small girl, with 2 braids and enormous dark eyes, that snapped up to Victoria immediately, alert and unafraid. Between them on the table were a notebook covered in carefully drawn characters, 2 juice boxes and half a sleeve of crackers. The man looked up. His expression didn't scramble into the apologetic panic she might have expected. He met her eyes steadily, and there was something in his face, a calm, measured dignity, that made Victoria feel just for a fraction of a second, like she was the one who had walked into the wrong room. "Miss Lane," he said. His voice was level. "I apologize for the intrusion. We'll be out of your way." He was already beginning to gather the notebook. The little girl was watching Victoria with a frank, curious gaze that reminded her of no one so much as herself at that age. A girl who looked at new things and saw puzzles rather than threats. Victoria should have nodded and walked to her office to retrieve her laptop. That was the logical sequence of events. That was what the evening required. Instead, she said, "What's her name?" The man paused. "Lily," he said carefully. Victoria looked at the child. "Nijisui, how old are you?" And Lily, without missing a beat, looked back at this tall, beautiful stranger in her white blazer and said in perfectly toned Mandarin, "Wolusui, Nine? I'm 6. And you?" Victoria Lane hadn't been caught off guard by anything in 4 years. She felt it now, a small, unfamiliar lurch in the chest like missing a step in the dark. She turned back to the man in the gray uniform. "What's your name?" "Marcus," he said. "Marcus Hale." She looked at him for a moment that stretched past professional. Then she nodded once, picked up her laptop from the chair where she'd left it that morning, and walked back to the elevator. But she did not call the venture capital firm back. She sat in the car in silence, watching Chicago blur past the window, and thought about a janitor who taught his 6-year-old daughter Mandarin in an empty conference room, and the way he had looked at her, not with deference, not with fear, but with the quiet, unyielding dignity of a man who knew exactly who he was. She thought about that all the way home, and that was the beginning of everything. By the next morning, Victoria Lane had already broken 3 of her own rules. The first rule she broke was personal. She never researched employees below director level. There were 800 people who worked at PharmaCorp, and Victoria's operational philosophy was built on elegant delegation. She hired exceptional people to manage other people, and she stayed in her lane. The org chart existed for a reason. The layers existed for a reason. She was a CEO, not a middle manager, and she had learned early that the fastest way to undermine a system was to start reaching around it out of curiosity. She reached around it anyway. At 11:17 the previous night, still in the structured stillness of her penthouse apartment in the Gold Coast, she had opened the PharmaCorp employee database, a system she technically had access to but hadn't personally navigated in 2 years, and searched for Marcus Hale. His file was thin, as maintenance staff files tend to be. Hire date, January 4th, 3 years prior. Performance reviews. Satisfactory, exceeds expectations. The exceeds expectations was from Dale Briggs, the floor supervisor, which told Victoria that whatever Marcus Hale was doing, he was doing it well enough to impress a man whose standards had never struck her as particularly rigorous. Emergency contact. Rosa Hale, listed as sister. Dependent listed, Lily Hale, age 6. No college degree field was filled in. The prior employment section listed a restaurant in Wicker Park, a warehouse job, and a brief period of freelance translation work that had apparently ended 4 years ago. Translation work. Victoria had stared at that line for a long time. She had then done something she had never done before in her professional life. She searched his name on LinkedIn. There was no profile. She searched it on a general browser, adding Chicago and his approximate age. What came back was sparse. A brief mention in a Harvard alumni newsletter from 13 years ago, a scholarship recipient recognized for academic achievement in East Asian studies and international relations. She almost missed it. It was 3 lines in a PDF that loaded slowly. The kind of document that existed in the digital world only because no one had thought to remove it. Marcus Hale, Harvard University, class of, and then nothing. No graduation year. No degree conferred. She had closed her laptop and sat in the dark for a while, listening to the city below. The second rule she broke was operational. She never arrived before her first scheduled meeting, which on Fridays was at 9. She arrived at 7:42. She told herself it was to prepare for the quarterly projections call. She stood at her office window for 26 minutes, watching the employee parking lot. The 2009 Honda Civic with the cracked rear bumper arrived at 8:11. She watched Marcus Hale get out of it, wearing his gray uniform and carrying a small black lunch bag and a canvas tote that she suspected held Lily's things from the night before. He walked steadily, without hurry, across the length of the parking lot. Something about the way he moved struck her. There was no performance in it. No self-consciousness. Nothing that asked the world to look at him. Just a man going to work. Victoria turned from the window and sat down at her desk and opened her projections report and did not look out the window again. The third rule she broke happened at 2 in the afternoon, when she summoned Dale Briggs to her office. Dale arrived looking the way Dale always looked when summoned to the executive floor, like a man who had done nothing wrong but was prepared to confess to several things just to be safe. He was 51, thick through the middle, with the permanently startled expression that comes from decades of answering to people who run hot. He sat across from Victoria with his hands flat on his thighs and waited. "Tell me about Marcus Hale," Victoria said. Dale blinked. "Marcus? On 18? Yes. He's good. Real good, actually. Never late, never calls out. Does the job, doesn't cause trouble. The other guys like him okay." Dale paused, visibly trying to assess what kind of answer was expected of him. "Did something happen?" "Nothing happened," Victoria said. "Does he ever speak to you? Have conversations?" "Marcus?" Dale seemed genuinely puzzled. "Not much. He's quiet. Keeps to himself mostly." "Why?" Victoria looked at him for a moment. "Does he speak any languages other than English?" The pause that followed was almost comically long. Dale looked at the ceiling, as though the answer might be written there. "I mean, we don't talk like that." He shifted in his chair. "Is there a problem with his work?" "No problem," Victoria said. "Thank you, Dale." After Dale left, Victoria sat at her desk and acknowledged something she had been avoiding for 17 hours. She was not simply curious about Marcus Hale. Curiosity was a clean, manageable thing, easily filed and set aside. What she felt was different. It was more like the sensation she got when she was reading a financial report and a number appeared that didn't fit, not wrong. Exactly, but conspicuously, compellingly out of place. A number that meant something. A variable that changed the shape of everything around it. She had built PharmaCorp's current valuation on her ability to recognize that sensation and follow it. She had followed it into 3 acquisitions that everyone said were too risky and that had, cumulatively, added $800 million to the company's value. She had followed it when she restructured the R&D division over the objections of the board and halved their development timeline. She was 29 years old and the youngest female CEO in the company's history, because she had learned to trust that sensation completely. It was telling her something about Marcus Hale. She just didn't know yet what it meant. On Friday evening, she stayed late again. This time it wasn't for her laptop. She was in her office, door open, ostensibly reviewing a contract, when she heard them. The same conference room, the same hour. This time, Lily was reading aloud in Mandarin from what sounded like a short passage, a simplified text perhaps, or something Marcus had written out for her. And Marcus was listening, occasionally interjecting with a correction or a question. Victoria could hear the patience in his voice as clearly as she could hear the language. It was the patience of someone who had enormous reserves of something and chose, deliberately, to give them here. She got up and walked to the doorway of the conference room. This time she didn't push the door. She stood to the side of it and listened, out of their sightline, for 4 minutes. Lily asked a question in rapid English. "Baba, why does the word for mother and horse sound almost the same?" "Tones," Marcus said. "Ma with the flat tone is mother. Ma with the falling rising tone is horse. The language lives in the music of it." "The music of it," Lily repeated, and then, with that uncanny quality Victoria had noticed the night before, the quality of a child who absorbs rather than learns, she said both words, back to back perfectly. The distinction was clean and exact. There was a brief silence, and then Marcus said softly, "There you go, baby girl. There you go." Victoria went back to her office. She sat down. She looked at the contract on her screen and did not read a single word of it. She called her assistant, Jen, who was long gone for the evening, and left a voicemail asking for the contact information of the PharmaCorp legal team's lead attorney. Then she opened a new document and began to type. She wasn't sure, yet, what she was building. But she knew, with the bone-deep certainty that had never failed her, that Marcus Hale was a variable, and that she was about to change his equation. What she didn't know was that 2 floors below in the building's small security office, a camera had captured her standing outside Conference Room B on 2 consecutive evenings. and the security guard who'd noticed wasn't sure what to make of it, but he mentioned it, offhandedly, to Dale Briggs on his way out. Dale Briggs, for all his limitations, understood one thing very well. When a CEO starts asking about a janitor, something is about to shift. He just hadn't decided yet whether that shift would be good news or bad news for Marcus Hale. The envelope appeared on a Monday. Marcus found it in his locker at 6:50 in the morning, slipped through the vents, a plain white rectangle with his name written on the front in handwriting he didn't recognize. Precise, controlled, slightly forward-leaning. The handwriting of someone who'd been taught to write by someone serious. He stood at his locker for a long moment before opening it. In his experience, unexpected envelopes in workplace lockers were not harbingers of good news. They were write-ups, termination notices delivered by cowardly supervisors who couldn't look a man in the face. He turned it over. No PharmaCorp letterhead. No HR seal, just his name. Inside was a single card, cream-colored stock, heavy in the hand. 4 sentences typed. Your daughter has a remarkable gift. So, I suspect, do you. I'd like to speak with you in my office. Tuesday, 4 p.m., Victoria Lane. Marcus read it twice. Then he put it back in the envelope. Placed the envelope in his locker, locked it, and went to work. He told no one. Not Rodriguez, who was in a chatty mood that morning and would have wanted every detail. Not old Pete. Not even Rosa, when she called that afternoon to check on Lily's school pickup. He turned the card over in his mind the way he turned most things, methodically. From every angle, looking for the catch. There was always a catch. The most likely scenario, as he analyzed it, was that someone had complained. Perhaps a senior executive had discovered that a janitor's child was spending evenings in the 18th floor conference room and taken issue with it. Perhaps this was the polite version of being let go. A private conversation before the official paperwork. The kind of thing that companies did when they wanted to avoid a scene. He had seen it before. The reasonable, the respectful approach that still ended with you walking out of the building without a job. He thought about Lily. He thought about Rosa's ankle, which was healing but not healed. He thought about the rent, about the aftercare program he'd been on the wait list for since September, about the $47 currently sitting in his savings account like a punctuation mark at the end of a very short sentence. He thought about all of it, and then he squared his shoulders and kept cleaning the floors. Tuesday at 3:50 in the afternoon, Marcus changed out of his uniform in the locker room, put on the spare button-down shirt he kept in his locker for the rare occasions that required it, a blue cotton Oxford, ironed flat, worn but dignified, and took the elevator to the 22nd floor for the first time in 3 years of employment. The executive suite was exactly what he'd imagined it would be. Vast, quiet, and designed to make visitors acutely aware that they were visitors. Jen, Victoria's assistant, was a composed young woman with a headset and an expression of professional neutrality. She greeted him by name, which surprised him, and told him to go right in. Victoria was expecting him. He pushed open the heavy door. Victoria Lane was standing at her window, her back to him, looking out at the Chicago skyline. She was wearing a steel blue dress and her hair was down today. He noticed this with the involuntary precision of someone whose eye had been trained by years of paying attention to things that didn't announce themselves. She turned when she heard him, and her expression was difficult to read. Not cold. Not warm. Somewhere in between, in the register of someone choosing very carefully. Mr. Hale, she said. Thank you for coming. Miss Lane, he said. She gestured to the chairs in front of her desk. He sat. She sat across from him, not behind the desk, he noticed, but beside it, in the way that someone sits when they want the conversation to feel like a conversation rather than a performance review. I owe you an explanation, she said, for why I was in that hallway. He waited. She told him about the forgotten laptop. Clean and straightforward. He believed her, which was one of the first things that shifted in the room. He had expected a power move, some calibrated display of authority, but her explanation was just the truth. Then she looked at him directly and said, I found the Harvard mention. The room was very quiet. I wasn't looking for it to use it against you, she continued. I want you to know that. I was trying to understand who you were, because what I heard in that conference room didn't match the file I had on you. Marcus said nothing for a moment. Outside, 30 stories below, Chicago moved in its constant indifferent current. "And what did you hear?" he asked finally. "I heard someone who speaks Mandarin better than most of my international relations hires, and I heard a child who is going to be extraordinary." She paused. "I also heard a teacher who heard, and that's a specific thing. Not everyone who knows a subject can teach it. Certainly not to a 6-year-old. He studied her face. "Why does this matter to you?" She was quiet for a beat. Genuinely quiet, not strategically. "Because I've spent the last 5 years building a company on the idea that talent doesn't always arrive in the right packaging. And then I stood in a hallway on my own 18th floor and realized I had someone on my maintenance staff who went to Harvard, speaks at least 2 languages fluently, and is raising a remarkable child on a custodial salary." Her voice was measured, but something underneath it was not. "And I thought, that's on me. That's a failure of the system I built." Marcus felt something tight in his chest. An old hardness, one he'd carried so long he barely noticed its weight anymore. He recognized what she was doing. He had seen enough of the world to recognize the architecture of a savior narrative when it was being constructed in real time. He was wary of it. Deeply wary. "What do you want from this conversation?" he asked. Direct, plain. She looked at him for a moment, and he thought he saw something flicker in her expression, something that might have been respect. "I want to offer you a role," she said. "Something in our international partnerships division. We're finalizing a distribution agreement with 3 firms in Beijing and Shanghai, and we need someone who can work directly with our Chinese partners. Cultural liaison, communications, document review. The position has been open for 2 months because I can't find someone who has both the language skills and the contextual understanding to do it properly." The silence stretched. "I haven't finished my degree," Marcus said. "I know. I've been out of the professional world for years. I know that too. Why would you give that role to me instead of hiring someone who has the resume for it?" Victoria looked at him steadily. "Because I've hired 3 people with the resume for it in the past 18 months and none of them had what you have. Which is judgment. I heard it in how you answered Lily's questions. You don't talk at people, you think alongside them." She leaned forward slightly. "And because I have a sense about people, Mr. Hale. My sense is that you are not a man who does anything halfway." Marcus was quiet for a long time. Outside, the March afternoon light was fading over the lake, turning the water from gray to silver. He was thinking about Lily. He was thinking about the $47. He was thinking about the night he'd sat in a hospital corridor on the south side and decided without ceremony to put down the life he'd been building and be present for the one that needed him. He thought about what it had cost. He thought about whether he was willing to trust a woman he had spoken to for a total of perhaps 8 minutes, who had looked him up without his knowledge, who was offering him something that felt almost too precisely shaped to the exact hollow in his life where hope used to live. He thought about Lily saying the word for shark, Shiyu, the delight in her voice. "I need to think about it," he said. "Of course," Victoria said. "Take whatever time you need." He stood, and she stood with him. They shook hands across the space between them. A clean, serious handshake, the kind between 2 people who mean what they say. He was at the door when she said quietly, "Mr. Hale, what happened? At Harvard?" He turned back. For a moment, something moved across his face. Not grief exactly, more like the expression of someone touching an old scar in the dark, testing whether it still hurts. "My mother got sick," he said. And then he went through the door. Victoria stood in her office for a long time after he left, looking at the empty chair. She had meant every word she said. The professional assessment, the structural argument, the case built cleanly on evidence and judgment. All of it was true. What she hadn't said, what she was not prepared to examine in the full light of a Tuesday afternoon, was the other thing. The thing that lived below the professional language, in the part of her that she kept very carefully managed and very rarely visited. She was 29 years old. She had run PharmaCorp for 4 years. She had not had dinner with anyone who interested her in longer than she could immediately recall. She had a penthouse, a driver, a company worth $2.3 billion, and she was very good at her life. She was also, in ways she rarely acknowledged, extraordinarily lonely. She looked at the chair where Marcus Hale had sat, not slumped, not rigid, but straight and still in that particular way of his, like a man who had learned to occupy exactly the space he was given without apology and without excess, and felt something that was probably inadvisable. Then Jen knocked on the door about the Beijing call, and Victoria Lane smoothed her dress and answered, perfectly composed. But Marcus Hale's answer had already changed something, and by the time he came back Wednesday with his decision, neither of them would be quite the same people who had sat across from each other that Tuesday afternoon. What Marcus didn't know was that Dale Briggs had gone to HR that same morning, and what Dale said was about to introduce a complication nobody had planned for. If you've ever watched someone stand at the edge of something that could change their life, really stood there and watched them breathe, you know there's a specific quality to that silence. It isn't empty. It's the fullest kind of quiet there is. Marcus Hale stood in that silence on Wednesday morning. He had not slept well. He lay in the dark of his North Side apartment, the one with the radiator that clanked at 2 a.m. and the window that let in a thin blade of March cold, and turned Victoria Lane's offer over in his mind, looking for what's underneath it, looking for what might bite. Lily had climbed into his bed at midnight, curling against his side without asking permission. Within 3 minutes she was breathing the deep, even breath of a child with a clean conscience. He lay awake beside her for 2 more hours and made his decision somewhere around 2:15 in the morning. He was going to say yes. Not because he trusted Victoria Lane completely. He didn't, not yet, in the way that a man who has been let down by institutions learns to meter his trust in careful installments. But because Lily had pressed her face against the cold conference room window last night and narrated the city below in Mandarin and English, and a wild, laughing mixture of both, and Marcus had watched her and felt something so large and so specific that it had no clean name. It was the feeling of a door in a wall he'd stopped expecting to have doors. He would say yes, but on his own terms. He arrived at the building at his usual time, changed into his uniform, and worked his shift with the same quiet efficiency that had earned him 3 years of satisfactory reviews. He cleaned the 14th floor. He fixed a supply room door that had been sticking for a week because nobody had asked him to and it needed doing. He ate lunch alone at a corner table in the break room, reading a library book about the Tang dynasty that Lily had checked out and then abandoned in favor of a book about sharks. At 3:45, he sent a message through the internal company system, the only written communication he had ever directed upward in 3 years, to Jen, Victoria's assistant. Please let Miss Lane know I have an answer. I'm available at her convenience. The reply came in 4 minutes. She says now, if you're free. He was. Victoria was on a call when he arrived. He could hear her voice through the closed door, clipped and decisive, the Mandarin syllables landing with precision. He stood outside and listened despite himself. Her accent was good. Not exceptional, not what he had built over years of study and practice, but genuinely competent. She was negotiating. Something about delivery timelines and a regulatory filing in Shanghai. She was holding her position without raising her voice. He noticed that, the way she held her ground without heat. The call ended. Jen nodded him in. Victoria was standing behind her desk this time, jacket on, composed in the way of someone who has just finished a demanding conversation and absorbed it cleanly. She looked at him when he came in, waited. I'll take the role, Marcus said without preamble, on 3 conditions. Something moved in her expression. Not surprise exactly. More like the slight recalibration of someone whose model of the situation just proved itself accurate. All right, she said. She did not reach for a pen or open a notepad. She just listened. First, my title reflects the actual work. I don't want to be a cultural consultant or any kind of softened version of what the job is. If I'm doing international partnership communications, that's what my title says. Agreed, she said. Second, I need a schedule that accounts for Lily. I can work early mornings and late evenings around school hours, and I'm available by phone in between. I won't miss a school event or a doctor's appointment, and I need that to be understood up front, not accommodated after the fact. Victoria was quiet for a moment. Understood, We'll build the schedule around it. Third, he paused. I don't want this to be charity. I want the salary to reflect the market rate for the role, not adjusted down because of where I'm coming from. The going rate. She looked at him for a long moment. There was something in that look, not admiration, not evaluation, but something that sat between the two. I was going to offer you market rate regardless, she said, but I'm glad you said it. Then we have an agreement, Marcus said. She extended her hand. He shook it. There's one more thing, she said, before he could turn to leave. Her voice shifted slightly, still professional, but there was a carefully managed quality to it that he'd begun to recognize as Victoria Lane working to say something true. Dale Briggs went to HR on Monday. He flagged the situation with Lily in the conference room as a potential policy violation. HR came to me yesterday. I want you to know that I handled it. The matter is closed. There will be no record on your file, but I thought you deserved to know it happened. The room was very still. Marcus absorbed this the way he absorbed most things, without visible reaction processing inward. He had spent 3 years being careful. 3 years moving through this building like he had no weight, no history, no needs that could complicate anyone's day. He had done everything right, and Dale Briggs had gone to HR anyway. Why? He asked. His voice was even. I think, Victoria said carefully, because he was afraid. When a CEO starts asking questions about someone on your team, that can feel threatening. He may have been trying to get ahead of something he didn't understand. She paused. I'm telling you this because you should know who moved against you. And because I don't want there to be anything between us that I know and you don't. Something shifted in Marcus's chest. Not gratitude. Something more complicated than gratitude. More structural. Like a load-bearing wall being moved to a better position. He looked at her for a moment with that steady, measuring gaze of his. Thank you, he said. You start Monday, she said. Jen will have everything ready. He nodded once and walked out. In the elevator going down, he stood with his hands at his sides and breathed. Somewhere in his chest, the door he'd felt 2 nights ago was still open. He was walking through it now. He was terrified and steady in equal measure. That evening, he told Lily. She was eating cereal at the kitchen table, her preferred dinner on the nights Marcus was tired, a fact she had intuited without ever being told. And she looked up at him with those enormous eyes and listened while he explained, in careful, honest terms, that things were going to change. That he would be doing a different job. That they would have more money, not a lot, but more. That he would still be at every school thing, every appointment, every evening. That nothing important was changing. Lily looked at him for a long time when he finished. Then she said in perfect Mandarin, Wo zhi dao ni neng zuo dao. I knew you could. He got up and did the dishes so she wouldn't see his face. Across town, in a penthouse that cost more per month than Marcus would earn in his new role in a year, Victoria Lane was sitting at her kitchen island with a glass of water she hadn't drunk, and her phone face down on the marble counter. She was thinking about the handshake. The specific quality of it. The way he had met her grip exactly, neither more nor less than required. The way he'd laid out his conditions not with aggression or performance, but with the simple authority of a man who knew his own value and saw no reason to disguise it. She had negotiated with some of the most powerful people in the pharmaceutical industry. She had sat across from men who used silence like a weapon and flattery like a handshake. She had never, not once, felt as clearly met as she had in that handshake. She turned her phone over, opened it, stared at a blank compose window for 30 seconds, put the phone down and went to bed. She lay in the dark a long time. She was 30 in 6 weeks. She had run a $2 billion company since 25. She had been careful and correct about almost everything, in the way of someone trying to prove something. She had never let herself want what she couldn't build a case for. Marcus Hale was not a case, he was something else. She didn't have language for it yet. She fell asleep without one. In the morning, the Beijing partners sent an urgent email, and Marcus Hale's first real test was about to arrive 4 days early. The email came in at 6:14 on Thursday morning. And by 6:30, Victoria was on the phone with her legal team. By 7, she had forwarded it to Marcus with a single line. I know you haven't officially started, but I need your read on this. No obligation. Marcus was already awake. He read the forwarded email twice, then a third time. It was from the lead partner at Zhongguancun BioLink, a man named Wei Jiangguo. 62. Patrician in the way of Chinese businessmen who survive multiple political climates by being indispensable to everyone. The email was written in flawless formal English, but Marcus read it the way you read a text in translation. What mattered was the register, the indirection, the precise placement of what was said and what was not. What was not said was the real message. He called the number Victoria had sent along with the email. She picked up on the second ring. Did you read it? She asked. Twice, he said. He's not actually requesting a timeline extension. A pause. Our legal team thinks he is. Your legal team is reading the English. The English is a courtesy. What he's saying underneath it is that someone at Zhongguancun has raised a concern about a member of your team. Probably legal, probably the IP attorney who was in the Shanghai meeting in January. He's giving you the opportunity to address it before it becomes an official problem. The extension request is face-saving. It means he doesn't want to say the hard thing directly, because that would require you to respond directly, which would embarrass both parties. Silence on the line. Then, who on my legal team was in the Shanghai meeting? I don't know your team, Marcus said. But I'd start there. Another pause. How confident are you? Confident enough that I'd be surprised if I'm wrong, he said. The phrase he uses, we hope to ensure all partners feel the process reflects their investment. That construction in formal Chinese business communication is almost always a signal of relational concern. Not logistical concern, it's face culture language. He's protecting you while warning you. Victoria was quiet for a long moment. Marcus could hear distantly the sound of her city mourning through whatever window she was standing at. Traffic. A siren. Chicago in early spring. I'll look into the legal team, she said. Thank you. I haven't started yet, he said. So this was just two people talking. He heard something on the line that might have been the beginning of a laugh, stopped quickly. Right, she said. Just two people talking. After she hung up, Marcus sat at his kitchen table with his coffee and thought. Lily was still asleep. The apartment was quiet in that particular morning way that he had come to love over years of being an early riser, the city outside still collecting itself, the light still deciding what color to be. He thought about what he'd just done, how natural it had felt, how immediately the subtext of Wei Jiangguo's email had resolved itself to him, the way a piece of music resolves to its tonic chord, not because he'd analyzed it methodically, but because that layer of language had always been where he lived. He had spent years thinking of his Mandarin as a relic, a beautiful, useless thing he kept polished out of love and habit. He had not expected to need it. He had not expected it to still be sharp. He thought about Lily. He thought about the conference room window and the city below. He went to wake her up for school. The week that followed was the strangest of Marcus's recent life, which had not been short on strange weeks. He worked his last days in maintenance. He had given Dale 2 weeks' notice. Formally and without drama, looking Dale in the eye with a steadiness that clearly discomfited the man, while simultaneously being onboarded, quietly, into his new role. Jen set up his email. He was issued a laptop. He attended 2 briefings with the International Partnerships team, a group of 4 people between the ages of 27 and 45, who received him with varying degrees of curiosity and professional courtesy. The youngest, a woman named Priya who managed logistics for the Asian markets, had grown up partly in Taipei. She tested his Mandarin within the first 10 minutes of meeting him, casually and with a smile, and her eyebrows went up in a way that told him everything he needed to know about being taken seriously. He did not see Victoria Lane in person for 11 days after the handshake. He received emails from her, brief, precise, often sent at unusual hours. She CC'd him on the Zhongguancun situation, which unfolded exactly as he'd predicted. The IP attorney had made a January representation that didn't align with PharmaCorp's registered patent holdings, a miscommunication Wei Jiangguo had flagged through the most diplomatic channel available. Victoria replaced the attorney on the account and sent a personal note that Marcus helped draft. Wei Jungguo responded warmly. The timeline extension was quietly withdrawn. The day that reply came in, Victoria sent a single-line email. You were right. Good work. But it was on the 11th day that everything changed. It was a Friday evening late, and Marcus was at his new desk on the 20th floor. He'd been moved to a proper office, small but real, with a window and a door that closed, finishing a document review when his phone rang. Not his work phone, his personal cell. Rosa's name on the screen. Hey, he answered. Marcus. Her voice was wrong. He knew his sister's voice the way he knew the weight of anything he'd carried for years. Lily's school called. There was an incident. She's okay. She's okay. But you need to come. He was already standing. What happened? A boy in her class. He said something to her. Rosa's voice was careful, the way it got when she was trying to manage his reaction. About your job. The old job. Someone's kid, apparently. One of the other parents said something at pickup and the kids repeated it. The teacher called me when she couldn't reach you. Lily hasn't cried, she's been very quiet, which is worse. Marcus was in his jacket. Phone to his ear, keys in hand. What did she say? What did he say to her? Rosa hesitated. He called her the janitor's kid, made it sound like... She stopped. Like it was something to be ashamed of. Marcus did not respond for a moment. He stood in his small office with the window that looked out over 20 floors of Chicago, and felt something move through him that he had not allowed himself to feel in a long time. Not anger exactly. Something older and more specific. The kind of feeling that has a memory attached to it. I'm on my way, he said. He was halfway to the elevator when Victoria Lane stepped off it. She was in her coat, clearly leaving for the evening, a bag over one shoulder and her phone in hand. She stopped when she saw him, read his face in one quick, accurate look. What's wrong? She said. He told her. 2 sentences. His voice was level. She did not say she was sorry, which he appreciated. She did not make it smaller with reassurance or bigger with outrage. She looked at him and said, Go. Everything here can wait. He nodded and moved past her. He was 3 steps into the elevator when she said his name. He turned. She was standing in the hallway, backlit by the corridor lights, and there was something in her expression that he had not seen there before. Not the CEO face, not the negotiator face, not even the careful truth face. Something underneath all of those, something direct and undefended. She's lucky to have you, Victoria said. Simply, without qualification. The elevator doors closed. Marcus rode down 30 floors in silence. He found Lily at Rosa's apartment, sitting at the kitchen table with a glass of orange juice and a book open in front of her that she was not reading. She looked up when he came in, and her face did the thing it sometimes did. That fast, almost invisible flicker that said she had been holding something and was now, with him here, allowed to put it down. He sat down beside her. He didn't ask what happened. He already knew what happened, he said in Mandarin. Quiet and careful. Ni me zuo quo shenme. You did nothing wrong. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she leaned against his shoulder and picked up her book and said nothing at all, which was the right thing. On the drive home, Lily asleep in the back seat, Marcus thought about the boy's words. The janitor's kid. He thought about what he would have felt at 6, hearing that directed at a father who had given up everything to stay. He thought about whether Lily understood what those years had cost. She was 6. She didn't yet. One day she would. He thought about Victoria Lane in that hallway. She's lucky to have you. No hedge, no performance, just the truth. He pulled into the space farthest from the building, sat with the engine off. Something was building between him and Victoria Lane. He was not naive enough to pretend he had not seen it. What he knew was that he was not the same man who had mopped that floor 3 weeks ago. Something in him had been called back from wherever it had gone. He was awake in a way he had not been in a long time. He got out of the car and carried his sleeping daughter upstairs, tucked her in carefully, stood in the doorway of her room for a long moment, watching the dark, quiet shape of her under the blanket. She was not the janitor's kid. She was Lily Hale, 6 years old, who spoke Mandarin with perfect tones and pressed her face to glass and named the world. His daughter. That was everything. He went to bed. He slept better than he had in weeks. And in the morning, there was a text on his personal phone from a number he'd only recently saved under V. Lane. It said, "How is she?" He typed back, "She's fine. Thank you for asking." Then, after a pause, he added, "And for what you said." The reply was brief. "I meant it." He stared at those 3 words for longer than was strictly reasonable. Then he put the phone in his pocket and went to make his daughter breakfast. He did not yet know what Monday would bring. He did not know that Wei Jianguo had, that same morning in Shanghai, told his American contact something that would detonate quietly inside PharmaCorp. He did not know what it would cost Victoria, or what she would do when it did. But somewhere in the architecture of everything, in the Mandarin that had brought them to the same doorway, in Lily's tones and Victoria's careful truth-telling, and Marcus's refusal to be less than what he was, something had been set in motion that none of them could stop now, even if they had wanted to. The call from Wei Jianguo came on a Monday, 2 weeks into Marcus's new role at 7:45 in the morning, to Victoria's direct line, which Wei Jianguo had never used before. The conversation lasted 11 minutes. Afterward, she sat very still, then called Marcus. "I need you in my office," she said. "Now." When he arrived, she was standing at her window. Her thinking position, he had come to understand. The place she went when she was working something out and needed the distance of the city below to do it. She turned when he came in and he saw immediately that something had happened. Not a crisis, but a wait. The kind that comes with information that changes the shape of what you thought you were building. "Wei Jianguo called me directly," she said. "He wants to add a language and communications division to the partnership agreement. A real one, staffed, budgeted, ongoing. He said." She paused and Marcus saw the controlled precision with which she was managing her expression. "He said the quality of the recent communications has been unlike anything he has worked with in 20 years of American partnerships. He wants to know if we can sustain it. He's asking for a 5-year commitment." Marcus was quiet for a moment. "What did you tell him?" "I told him I'd call him back today." She looked at him directly. "I need to ask you something, Marcus, and I need you to answer me honestly." "I usually do," he said. "Is this what you want? Not what makes sense professionally, or what's good for PharmaCorp. Is this what you want for your life? Because if I build a division around your skills and your judgment, and then you decide in a year that this was a detour, it costs both of us something we can't get back." He considered her. The room was quiet. Chicago moved outside. Chicago. Indifferent and vast. "When I was 20, he said, I thought I knew exactly what my life was going to look like. I was wrong about that. Not about what I wanted. I wanted to build something, with language, in the spaces between cultures where people don't understand each other. I wanted to do that work. I was right about that part." He paused. "I've been in the wrong room for 10 years. I'm in the right room now." She held his gaze. "Then I'll tell him yes." She turned back to her desk. He was at the door when she said his name. His first name, for the first time. "Marcus." He turned. She was looking at him with that expression, the underneath one. Color in her face that hadn't been there a moment ago. "The board reviews organizational structure in 6 weeks. Your division will need a formal presentation. I'd like to build it with you if you're willing." "Yes," he said. "Good." She turned back to her screen. The CEO was back, efficient and composed. "I'll have Jen schedule time this week." He went back to his office. He sat down and thought about Wei Jianguo telling Victoria the quality of communication had been unlike anything in 20 years. He thought about a 20-year-old in a Harvard lecture hall who had believed, without complication, that language would be his life's instrument. He thought about everything between that boy and this moment. Every loss, every detour, every morning in the gray uniform, every evening in the conference room with Lily's voice in the quiet. None of it wasted. All of it had been accumulating toward this room. This window, this chance. 3 weeks later, the board presentation went better than anyone had planned for. Marcus presented alone. Victoria had offered to co-present, and he had politely declined. He stood before 12 board members, all of them accustomed to the theater of executive presentations. and did something none expected. No slides. He spoke for 22 minutes. He outlined the division structure, staffing model, revenue projections, and the strategic value of genuine cultural fluency over translated formality. He told them, briefly and without sentimentality, about sitting in a conference room teaching his daughter Mandarin and what it had taken to arrive at this table. One board member, a woman named Frances Alcott, 71, a 30-year veteran of the pharmaceutical industry with a reputation for asking questions that ended careers, leaned forward when he finished and said, "Why didn't you come back to this work sooner?" Marcus looked at her steadily. "Because nobody asked," he said. Frances Alcott nodded once, slowly, and said nothing else. The division was approved unanimously. Afterward, in the corridor outside the boardroom, Victoria stopped beside him. She had sat in the back of the room during the presentation, observer, not presenter, and she had watched him the way you watch something you've wagered on and find yourself quietly, profoundly right about. She stood close enough now that he could see the small, controlled thing in her expression that wanted to be larger. "You didn't need me in there," she said. "I didn't need you in there," he agreed. A pause. "I'm glad you were there anyway," he said. Quiet and plain. The kind of thing that, once said, sits in the air between two people and changes the temperature of everything. She looked at him. For once, Victoria Lane, who had a precise and ready answer for most situations, did not immediately speak. She let the silence be what it was. Then she said, "Lily's recital is this Friday. You mentioned it last week." "I did," he said carefully. "I'd like to come, if that's appropriate." A pause. If she'd want that. He thought about Lily, about the way she had watched Victoria that first evening in the conference room, not with a child's wariness, but with that particular frank assessment, that eyes-wide evaluation that saw further than it had any right to. He thought about what Lily had said afterward, matter-of-factly, on the drive home. "She looked like she was trying to figure something out, Baba. About you." "She'd want that," Marcus said. Victoria nodded and something settled in her, visibly, quietly, the way a building settles when it finds its foundation. That Friday, Marcus sat in the second row of the school auditorium on the north side of Chicago, an auditorium that smelled of floor wax and decades of school plays and small important moments. The seats were filling with parents and grandparents and aunts and uncles, all of them wearing the slightly unguarded expression that places like this produce. The softened, willing to be moved expression. Victoria Lane arrived at 7:02 in a dark coat with her hair down and sat beside him without ceremony. She was not in her CEO clothes. She was in the register of a person who had made a quiet choice to show up somewhere real. She said hello and he said hello, and the lights went down before either of them had to figure out what came next. The first grade class performed a piece that involved a lot of enthusiastic imprecision and at least one child who had clearly decided the choreography was optional. Then Lily walked to the front of the small stage. She stood in her white dress with the two braids, small and straight and entirely unafraid, with those enormous dark eyes that looked at new things and saw puzzles. She was supposed to recite a poem. What she did instead, without warning, without anyone having planned it, in the way that Lily Hale consistently operated outside the frame of what was expected, was recite it first in English, then again in Mandarin. Clear, perfectly toned, absolutely certain. The auditorium was very quiet. Marcus felt something move through him that he had no language for, in English or Mandarin or anything else. It was the kind of feeling that lives below language. He sat very still and let it happen. Beside him, Victoria Lane was not still. Her hand had moved, just slightly, instinctively, in the involuntary response of someone who reaches for something without deciding to. Her fingers stopped just short of his arm on the armrest between them. He noticed. He looked at her hand, then at her face. She was watching Lily. Her expression was entirely unguarded for once, open and moved in the way that the best moments in unrehearsed places make people open and moved. There was something bright in her eyes that she was not bothering to manage. He turned his hand over on the armrest. Just that. Just open. She looked down. She looked up at him. The auditorium was full of sound, the audience beginning to applaud for Lily, a rising wave of warmth, and in the middle of it, they were briefly in their own quiet. She placed her hand in his. It was not a declaration. It was not a performance. It was the simplest possible thing. Two people deciding, together, to hold on to something. On the stage, Lily was taking her bow with the solemnity of someone accepting an honor they had fully expected, but are gracious about nonetheless. She found her father in the second row. She always found him, the way she always had, and her face broke into the grin that was just for him, wide and private and complete. Then her eyes moved one seat to the left. She saw Victoria Lane. She saw the hands. Lily's grin did not waver. It shifted, deepened if anything, in the knowing way of a child who has seen further than anyone expected and is not even slightly surprised to have been right. She gave a smaller bow. Just for Victoria. A private acknowledgement. One puzzle solver to another. The lights came up. The applause continued. And in the second row of a school auditorium on the north side of Chicago, Marcus Hale, Harvard dropout, former janitor, a man who had put down a life and rebuilt it quietly across a decade of gray uniformed mornings and evenings in borrowed conference rooms, sat with his daughter's laughter coming toward him and the warmth of a held hand on his right, and felt without ambiguity or condition that he was exactly where he was supposed to be. He had not expected this. That was the best part. He had learned to expect very little, and the world had surprised him. It had given him Lily. It had given him language. It had given him this moment. In the morning there would be work. Real work. His work. In an office with a window and a title that said exactly what it meant. And on the drive home, Lily would be in the back seat telling them both, in 3 languages, everything she had seen.